And our final speaker in this session is Leslie Batty. Something completely different, as they say. Theology in dialogue with coastal science and management. I stand up after 10 minutes.
Right, there you go. I'm a retired ecologist and coastal scientist, and I'm also a retired Anglican minister in the Diocese of Lincoln. And my talk really sort of brings those worlds together. In fact, I'm working on a PhD project with Bishop Grosseteste University in Lincoln. And so with theology in dialogue with coastal science and management is just taking an aspect of what I'm working on. And I'm testing the proposition that management of the coastal zone presents an ideal scenario for exploring the distinctiveness of a Christian environmental ethos. And in the words of the noted eco-theologian Celia Dean Drummond, the ways in which theological analysis might make a difference. Now, it's known that environmental management decisions are shaped not only by technical considerations, but also by the values, ideals, and attitudes of the people and communities involved. The question is, in the words of Jonathan Moo, what can be distinctive about a Christian environmental ethos? And if it is distinctive, could it lead to differences in method and approach? This I wanted to explore using a specific case study to work out whether theological analysis could make a difference, and if it could, how could it be put in practice? Our coasts are dynamic social ecological systems where the human and natural systems are closely linked together. They're of great importance to humanity for a range of reasons, from the biological productivity of coastal ecosystems, which provide food and other material benefits and services, to the opportunities that coasts provide for tourism, for trade, for industry, and seaborne travel. There's a resulting concentration of human communities and activities in coastal regions, and these give rise to complex issues as competing human activities put pressure on natural habitats and species, as can be seen in this aerial view of Skegness in Lincolnshire. At the same time, they're on the front line in relation to the effects of climate change. And the juxtaposition of so many human and natural features in the coastal zone also makes them particularly vulnerable to coastal hazards such as erosion, flooding, and sea level rise. The question facing society is how to manage all these human demands, which are often competing with one another, as well as with the natural environment. My study focuses on the Tyne to Tees coast in northeast England, and it crosses disciplines by bringing theology into dialogue with environmental sciences to explore the potential contribution that theology might make to the management of place-based environmental issues. And I chose the Tyne Tees coast because it presents a complex mixture of valued natural features and human activity. And there are opportunities there for stakeholders and local communities to participate in the management and decision-making process. And this is ultimately where well-informed faith groups could help to make a difference. It's also somewhere I knew a little from undertaking ecological surveys there. And until the 1990s, the coast was one of the most industrialised and polluted in Britain. But a major clean-up of the area and regeneration in the 1990s has resulted in substantial areas being designated as national and internationally important sites for nature conservation. And 1/3 is a heritage coast. But environmental challenges still remain, and there are growing pressures from economic redevelopment, urban expansion, tourism, recreation, pollution, coastal erosion, and sea level rise. And my study needed an analytical method that would bring theological reflection into dialogue with the complexities of coastal zone management. And I achieved this by bringing together two interdisciplinary frameworks: the theologically based iterative praxeological method, which was developed by a theologian and a biologist, Russell Butkus and Stephen Combs in the USA, for examining complex environmental and social problems. And combining that with the DAPSIA, Drivers, Activities, Pressures, Impacts, Responses framework, which is a recent version of a widely accepted and valued framework used in environmental management. ITPM is ultimately derived from liberation theology and involves scientific and social analysis of a problem and theological reflection on the results of those analyses, with, I quote, the goal of producing ethical norms for action, strategic solutions, and public policy guidelines. Then there is planning for praxis, putting the results of that reflection into practice in terms of engagement and action. DAPSIA is based on the idea that there are driving forces or drivers in human society that drive human activities, which in turn put pressures on the environment, causing changes in the state or condition of the environment. These state changes then lead to impacts on human welfare, which may bring about societal responses in the form of legal, policy, or economic measures or behavioural changes. Eventually, these responses may have a feedback effect on the drivers and activities, reducing or mitigating for the pressures on the environment. And I've put these two frameworks together as an ITPM DAPSIA integrated framework, adding the DAPSIA components to the ITPM cycle and switching some positions around. Both DAPSIA and ITPM can be applied to environmental scenarios at different levels of geography and complexity. And Butkus and Combs write that ITPM can be utilised by people in a parish, school, or university context. So it can be used widely to bring theology into dialogue with environmental management at any level. And so my integrated framework, I consider, has the same level of flexibility. My scientific analysis of the Tyne to Tees coast has involved the identification, description, and analysis of its key environmental features and processes and the anthropogenic pressures that exist there. And I've also undertaken some consultation with key coastal practitioners. And through this analysis, I've identified the DAPSIA components of state change, pressures, and activities, as can be seen in this example concerning leisure developments on or near some sand dunes. And I see the chair has stood up, so I'll leave you to read that as far as you can. A social analysis followed, in which I identified the underlying human causes and consequences of environmental change, both past and present, and the ways in which the degradation and recovery of the coastal ecosystem have affected human welfare, and the policy and management measures that are currently being employed. And through this analysis, I identified the drivers, impacts, and current responses, and this is an example of the sand dunes. In the theological ethical analysis, I've explored relevant themes in biblical eco-theology literature and examined biblical material pertaining to the coast, relating them to the findings of both the scientific and social analyses. And I've been looking for insights, themes, and principles that I'm now using to build a theological ethical framework for the Tyne to Tees coast, and more widely for other coastal regions, to help guide decision-making and encourage participation by church communities as local stakeholders. In the ethical praxis stage, I aim to make recommendations for putting theological ethical principles into practice as specific new responses that could be implemented on a local level. And finally, I'm hoping post-PhD to discuss with some coastal churches in the northeast of England and in Lincolnshire how my findings and the ITPM DAPSIA model itself could be used locally to encourage and guide their participation in working with others to ensure a sustainable future for their coast. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you give an example of what, on your theological reflection part, what an eco-biblical input to that would be? Just one example.
What I've been doing is looking at, so I've been looking at general literature such as Christian environmental stewardship theology. So I've been looking at that. I've also been looking at biblical material on the coast, going back to, for example, the appearance of the coast in Genesis with the division of the oceans and the land, and just what implications there may be there, forward through to Jesus's ministry on the Sea of Galilee, and even further forward to biblical visions of the coast in the future. There's quite a lot there. It's surprising how much there is on the coast in the Bible. The key thing is then turning it into principles that can be applied.
Any other questions? We've just about pretty well exactly filled our 3/4 of an hour. I'd just like to say thank you for some familiar views in your pictures there. Okay.